Next, we will have a co-presentation by Faisal Bhabha, who is Associate Professor at Osgoode Hall Law School and founding member of the Arab Canadian Lawyers Association. And Dania Majid, who is the founder and executive member of the Arab Canadian Lawyers Association. So did you do? Yeah. Okay. And they will map out some of the legal implications of the parliamentary vote and some of the moves towards anti-BDS criminalization and intimidation globally.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to address this important topic to such a full house of engaged citizens. And it's always inspiring to speak to a crowd of people of mixed ages and backgrounds and professions and places in life and so on. So often our conversations are being had amongst very small, narrow communities, even within the academy, and so I really value the opportunity to speak outside the ivory tower. So I'm the legal expert. I'm not really going to talk much about the law because my view is that this topic is not really a legal issue, although certainly for non-legal experts there is a perception of a change in law, and it's precisely that perception that is what we have to be concerned about, because while it's not criminalization in any technical sense of the word, this unprecedented motion is indeed vilification and does undermine and challenge values that we typically view as essentially Canadian, and that is respecting differences of opinion, whether you agree or not with the particular substance of the subject. And so Canadians don't have to all support BDS in all of its forms and all of its manifestations, or at all, in order to support the right of other Canadians to advocate and to speak about it and to seek to persuade others to join on. This is a movement that is inclusive and is looking to gain allies and is not looking to force anybody to believe anything. And it just seems completely ironic and hypocritical on the part of a government to step in and seek to influence a topic that in a free and democratic society you would expect it to relish the idea that its citizens are discussing and disagreeing and seeking to persuade and negotiating the terms of this. And this parliamentary interference is nothing but that, interference. And so let's look at what the motion actually says. And I think Alan has laid this out. I'll try not to be too repetitive. So it was a Conservative motion that calls on the House, that is the body of elected legislators, to, quote, reject the BDS movement, boycott, divestment, and sanctions, which it describes as, quote, promoting the demonization and delegitimization of the state of Israel. Now, it doesn't provide any reason why that's a bad thing to begin with. And it goes on to call on the government to condemn any and all attempts by Canadian organizations, groups, or individuals to promote the BDS movement, both here at home and abroad. So it's seeking to direct, restrain, and potentially threaten punishment, even if it has no teeth to effect punishment, for simply exercising expressive rights that are protected by the Constitution. There's no implication in anything of this motion that there's anything illegal about supporting BDS or inherent in BDS. It's actually a moral statement. And so the question to be asking our elected officials is, why take a stand on this position where there are at least equally compelling moral positions on either side? And that's not to say that I agree that there's any sort of equality between the positions, but when a government takes a strong position on an issue where the nature of our democracy requires that there be a diversity of opinions and that the issue be debated publicly, we can only interpret that as an effort to stifle free expression, and that's something that should concern us very much. So looking at the numbers, I mean, the motion would never have passed if it weren't for Liberal support. And the Liberal Party and our current government and our handsome Prime Minister deserve to be raked over the coals for this. And this is our most colorful, our most diverse body of legislators we've ever seen delivered to Ottawa. by votes from within our communities. These are legislators, members who represent people who care deeply about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And I think it's important to let our members of parliament know that. And we have much stronger lines, and we have audiences in our members these days from the Liberal Party, because whether they want to admit it or not, they are swayed and affected by phone calls and the pressure that they receive from their members. And while the Conservatives may have been prepared to simply say they don't care about an entire segment of their electorate, the Liberals do still care. And I know that we've been celebrating within the Canadian Muslim community 10 members of the community that have been elected to Parliament this year, and last year. I've been trying to gather figures, but it appears that most of those individuals who definitely benefited and profited off the votes of members of communities that cared about this issue simply didn't show up for the vote. And that for me is shameful. That's as shameful as voting in favor of it. And they shouldn't be let off the hook for that. And these are people who are friends of ours. These may be people who have been allies of ours, and it's precisely for that reason that they deserve to be raked over the coals for this. In my opinion, the Liberals were let off the hook on an issue that deserves to attract tremendous shame, and they need to be called out on it. So the final tally was 229 in favor of condemning the BDS movement, with only 51 opposed. The NDP voted against the measure, but not on principled grounds, or not on the substantive principle of BDS, on the principle of free speech, and that's a fine principle. Only the Bloc Québécois argued that the BDS campaign constitutes legitimate criticism of Israeli policies, and they deserve to be commended for that. Of course, they have not a lot of skin in the federal political game. They can take positions of conscience, and it's an opportunity, I think, for us to highlight that the Bloc, which is unconstrained by those sorts of political influences, have taken a position of conscience, and we should put a lot of weight in that, regardless of what we think of their overall political platform. So what we have is a Canadian government under a new leadership continuing the policy of its predecessor, that is going against the tide in the world and of other institutions. We have universities, churches, trade unions, organizations, corporations divesting from Israel or Israeli connected companies. In Europe, personal boycotts by a variety of entertainers and academics are matched by a growing chorus of corporations who are pulling out of Israeli business ventures and banning or putting warning labels on settlement-produced products. In 2014, foreign direct investment in Israel dropped 46% from the previous year. We don't know what sector that's in, and it may be that the arms sector, certainly with guaranteed American subsidies, will remain a robust sector of the economy, but it is possible, and it does appear that Israel is feeling the effects of BDS. Why is it that it's reaching a height now, only 11 or 12 years after the movement began? It's because it works. It's having an effect, and so there is much to take heart, though we may feel the pressure coming down. Usually when power begins to acknowledge those who are clamoring against it, it's because they're having some positive effect with respect to their mandate, and so we should take heart from that. In 2014, The Economist described BDS as, quote, a campaign that is gathering weight. It went on to detail the potential economic damage that could be caused to Israel if it were to pick up. And it noted that Israeli businesses, which have tended to steer clear of politics, had begun to advocate for peace and support the Israeli peace movement for reasons of their own economic interests. Now, that may not make much difference in the long run, given the current state of the Israeli peace movement, at least the liberal peace movement in Israel. But it does suggest that BDS can have an impact, and it can nudge the tide in a new direction. And the fact that Israel has responded quickly and swiftly is further evidence that BDS is working. Israel has done everything it can to marshal its allies and influence power at the state level, at least, through diplomatic means, to what is really a growing popular chorus amongst the various sectors that I've detailed. And this is image management, and Israel has been doing this with respect to on a variety of fronts over several years. But today, after more than 10 years, BDS, which came from the grassroots, which has always been about nonviolent popular resistance, is having an effect. And even governments are paying attention, not here, not in North America, but in Europe. The tide is changing. And meanwhile, we have a government that goes in the exact opposite direction when it comes to world opinion and the general consensus on the state of international law and Israel's obligations with respect to that. And in this respect, Canada has continued to be an embarrassment on the world stage. So while the government tarnishes the reputation of well-intentioned Canadians engaging in activity that is eminently Canadian, it's working to sanitize the reputation of a foreign country, sure, an ally, from what it perceives as demonization and delegitimization, without even justifying why that is so important. You know, the facts about what Israel is and what Israel does, they speak for themselves, and Canadians can inform themselves and make decisions on the basis of their own conscience. We don't need our government to be dictating our political views to us. So while our new government arms the Saudis and primes Israel, we have much to be concerned about, at least with respect to our foreign policy in the Middle East, as this Prime Minister is appearing to try to make himself look as similar to the last Prime Minister as he can. And that is something all Canadians, regardless of their support for BDS or not, should be concerned about. So I'll leave it at that, and I welcome questions.
All right, so thank you again for the invite, and I'm so happy so many people came out today to talk about BDS and forego Game 5 of the Raptors, so much appreciated. So I'm going to start talking about why BDS, and there are many reasons why, and I'm going to focus on one of the legal ones. And when the motion came out in Parliament, I've looked up Tony Clement's press release. He was one of the sponsors. And in it, he talked about reasons why they didn't like the BDS, and it talked about singling Israel out, the only democracy in the Middle East, and contested that it should be treated with fairness. And I thought, Palestinians would love nothing more than have Israel be treated with fairness, rather than the impunity it currently enjoys. According to Israeli legal scholar Allegra Pichiko, since 1967, Israel has continuously violated every provision of the Fourth Geneva Convention after capturing and occupying the Palestinian territory. It is also the longest military occupation in modern history and receives more in USA than all of Africa combined, including under Obama's reign. So the reality is that with the composition of the Security Council, Canada's unwillingness to prosecute Israel for war crimes under the universal jurisdiction of the Fourth Geneva Convention, as well as Israel's judicial military court systems that are part and parcel of the occupation, Palestinians, for the most part, have no recourse under international law to address these breaches under the convention. So therefore, BDS doesn't single Israel out, but in fact, the international community has. So this is why grassroots organizations really have relied on BDS, because it's really their only way to circumvent the blockage and obstacles that states have put in their way to hold Israel to account. So, going back to Canada's motion, we saw that the three main parties all declared their support, or their opposition to BDS as a concept. And really, what we see is, the Conservative Party, in particular, Tony Clement and Michelle Rempel, introducing this bill, which passed motion, which passed in February. Now, coincidentally, Canada is not the only country that has been undergoing these types of statements and bills going through their countries. And I've noticed when doing the research and preparing for this talk, a lot of these bills have come into force starting in 2015 till about 2016. And I was just like, everything was last year or this year, when I went through all the list of countries. And then I found an article in Ynet, which is an Israeli news source, and luckily translated from Hebrew into English by the Electronic Intifada, in which the newspaper attributes all the anti-BDS activities in numerous countries to the Israeli government. And there is a concerted diplomatic effort and directive from the Israeli state to their embassies and in different countries to really go after BDS, and not in a public way, which the article criticized, when the Israeli government took a public stance against the London campaign, but behind closed doors through diplomatic channels where the rest of us can't see what they're up to. So we've described what the motion says. So really, it wasn't a surprise seeing, this coming from the Conservatives or from Trudeau, who has been an ardent opponent of BDS and has really voted in line with Harper when Harper was in government on many other ideological bills, such as Bill C-51. So, as Faisal said, what does this motion mean? It's really, nothing more than political theater at the expense of BDS supporters. And it should be noted that both Clement and Rempel have been tapped to run for the conservative leadership. And as we've witnessed in the politics of the United States, that if you're going to run for the head of any country, you need to, swear allegiance to the state of Israel. So, the Trudeau government was newly elected, and I think the Conservatives thought this would be an easy target to make Trudeau's, sunny ways a little sweatier and uncomfortable. So, as I said, the motion is not law; it's a parliamentary procedural tactic. So this motion did not go through the typical introduction and 3 readings and received any type of royal assent. It was debated. And as Faisal said, the debates from the members of the Muslim Arab community, MPs of the Muslim Arab community, were quite abysmal. And in many cases, some of them actually did vote in support of the actual motion. So, but there is no enforcement mechanism built into this motion, and so far, no groups have been condemned by the government. So it's also important to note that soon after this motion came into play, that Clement, the same author of this motion, wrote an open letter to Justin Trudeau condemning the appointment of Canadian legal scholar Michael Link as UN Special Rapporteur on Palestine for his anti-Israeli positions. But interestingly enough, he did not even reference his own motion in condemning Michael Link. And neither did Dania when he tweeted to the UN that this appointment should be reconsidered. However, it is still early days of this motion, and the Conservatives have plenty of time to think up ways to use it. And for instance, it could potentially be used as a tactic to exclude groups from government meetings or from receiving possible government funding. However, that said, the government has already done these things without the benefit of such a motion. Now, what's more concerning potentially with this motion is that it could be a weather balloon that has been sort of floated up there to see what the Canadian tolerance is for such an anti-BDS legislation. And there could potentially be something more that could come down the road, either from the municipal, provincial, or federal level, that might be inspired or in line with what we have seen by our other Western allies. So I'm going to talk about the other countries. There's a lot of stuff out there, so I'm just going to focus on the ones that have received the most profile, and I'm just going to go through those really quickly. And then I'm going to circle back to Canada once you have a bit of a comparison. So in February 2016, the UK published a government guidance note regarding procurement policies, and that's sort of how they do business and how they purchase their supplies. That said, public bodies such as local councils and some universities could face fines in civil court cases if they boycott signatories of the World Trade Organization. So Israel is one of those signatories. However, this received a lot of publicity and, saying that, the UK is banning BDS. However, these are guidelines and not laws, so they're not enshrined and they don't carry the same force. They target institutions rather than individuals. The War on Want is one organization in the UK that has examined these guidelines very carefully and have received got a legal opinion to show that this was really more of an inflammatory rhetoric tactic and meant to intimidate and BDSers. But legal opinion still remains that it is legal for councils and universities to take ethical stances and exclude companies that violate human rights. So then in 2015 and 2016, we have seen a huge flurry of activity in the United States. And we see this at the state level and we see this at the federal level. So what we see is several things. We have statements, bills, and bills that have been proposed. I'm not going to talk about the statements because those statements, same thing, inflammatory language, have no real legal force at this point. The bills, ironically, are bills that tend to boycott the boycotters. So they're opposed to boycott, but they're going to boycott them. So we have seen this so we have these bills, and what we have also seen on campuses are lawfare tactics. So lawfare really stands for civil warfare, but this is not a criminal tactic, it's a civil legal action. So you're talking about different mechanisms under, not under the criminal codes. So Palestine Legal has done extensive work on fighting lawfare on campuses. So you can refer to them for more details on what has happened, but it's really things around discrimination and freedom of expression, and it's really a bullying tactic to try to knock down any sort of debate on campus. So the BDS laws, there's at least 24, and there's probably been more since this number has come up. So we're looking at basically New York, California, Florida, Illinois, Arizona, South Carolina, Tennessee, Indiana, and then at Congress. So some of these bills are not criminal either. So we have 2 bills in New York, which basically would require the state government to develop, using credible information available to the public, a list of persons it determines boycotts Israel. So it's a blacklist, basically. If you boycott Israel, you end up on this list. Anyone on this list would be barred from partnering with state agencies unless they can demonstrate in a written statement that they are not engaged in the boycotting of Israel. It's not clear how this is going to function, but this is the type of McCarthy-era tactic that the state of New York is looking at. They're also looking at targeting state pensions funds. They are looking at prohibiting them from investing in institutions that have divested from Israel. So there's a resolution pending in Congress that would condemn the European Union's decision to label goods produced in Israeli settlements in the occupied territory and Golan Heights. So this is a way for not only the US to control what they do, they're also trying to control the Europeans from passing laws of their own. So Illinois has an anti-boycott law that establishes a screening mechanism to compel state pension boards to exclude foreign corporations that have adopted BDS guidelines. Something to note with these types of bills is that they do not distinguish between settlement and non-settlement products. So they're treating all of them the same, despite the fact that it is official US policy that settlements are illegal. Last year, Barack Obama signed into law the federal anti-BDS provision that was tucked away in the Trade Promotion Authority bill. And you might have heard last year a lot of stuff about the fast track, and there was a lot of controversy about this fast track bill. So within this bill was this little provision that said, the principal negotiating objective of the United States is to discourage politically motivated actions to BDS Israel in current negotiations with the European Union over the TTIP, which is a European-American trade partnership. So again, it did not distinguish between settlement and non-settlement products, and this caused a lot of controversy in the States. So, and this is something social justice groups have been, who have been fighting, a lot of these trade provisions have complained about the loss of autonomy once you sign these agreement trade groups to be able to pass laws that benefit the public interest. So in February 2016, there's the Combating BDS Act of 2016. This was just introduced by Republican and Democratic senators. And the bill seeks to authorize state and local governments to divest assets and prohibit investment in any entity that engages in commerce or investment related BDS targeting Israel. So they're basically telling, it's a state law that allows, a federal law that allows states to go ahead and pass BDS without obstacle. So it would be interesting to see if any of these BDS laws were to be challenged legally, would they be constitutional? Because there is a 1982 landmark decision from the US Supreme Court, the NAACP versus Claiborne Hardware, where they ruled that boycotts and related activities to bring about political, social, and economic change are political speech, occupying the highest rung of hierarchy in First Amendment values. So it would be interesting to see whether or not they would go back against this, a very important case. The one country where there is actual criminalization is France. And in October 2015, France's highest court of criminal appeals upheld the conviction of a dozen Palestinian solidarity activists for calling for the boycott of Israel. The federal freedom of the press law prescribes imprisonment or a fine of up to $50,000 for parties that provoke discrimination, hatred, or violence towards a person or group on grounds of their origin, their belonging or their not belonging to an ethnic group, a nation, and a nation is key, a race or a certain religion. In this case, the group was fined collectively $14,500 plus legal costs. This made France the only country to criminally charge people. So there is a second law as well that has captured at least 20 BDS activists called the Lelouch Law, which was passed in 2013, which extends anti-racism law to the targeting of specific nations for discriminatory treatment. So basically what got them captured is that they wore t-shirts to protest that say "Free Palestine, Boycott Israel." This was out front of a grocery market. This year, there was a woman at International Women's Day March who was arrested for wearing a similar t-shirt. Israel in April 2015, they upheld their BDS law that imposes stiff sanctions for those advocating boycott of Israel. Note, theirs are fines, not criminal, so France even goes above Israel. So this allows people to sue and win compensation for individuals that call for economic or cultural boycott. But there's a lot of stuff going in Israel, and I clearly don't have the time. I just want to point out what is happening in Canada on the criminalization front. It's important to note that the bar for hate speech is extremely high. It has to reach the level of incentive. However, the law has been amended to include national origin along with the criteria of hate and along with the criteria of race and religion under the hate speech provision of the Act. So the potential is there. And this was documented in Neil MacDonald's articles for the CBC, which caused a huge uproar last year. And he details this it's really very specific. And this was in response to a question to Public Safety Minister Blaney about what he meant by zero tolerance of boycotters, and they came back with this provision. So when he published this, there was a huge uproar, and the next day Stephen Harper basically backed away. For more information sort of on this, I would direct you to the BC Civil Liberties Association, BC Civil Liberties Association, as well as Amnesty International, who both put out public opinions, legal opinions on this criminal code and what had happened in this case. basically confirming that it is freedom of expression and that boycotts are a legitimate tool. So I'm just going to leave it at that. Thank you.